Hi there, and welcome to One Idea Away, not just a podcast, but a community and ongoing conversation meant to inspire and empower individuals to live more fully, deeply, and consciously. Let's jump into today's episode right now. Hello there, everyone. I want to welcome you to the One Idea Away livecast here for August. It has been a fun summer. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourselves throughout the course of this summer, whatever it is that you've been up to. I know that quite a few of you have been joining us online with the 28 Days to Connection Challenge we've had going on. You've been lively inside of the One Idea Way Facebook group and community that's there as well. Some of you certainly have probably just been following along with some of the newsletters and podcasts and articles and things like that. But this month, I really was excited to bring this to you because I also think it moves us into our fall season pretty interestingly, and we'll get to why in a little bit. But we're going to talk about the importance and impact of finding your tribe. It's always been amazing to me exactly how it is that the people around us really start to shape who it is that we are. This was something that was quite different for me. I found it in a lot of different ways over the course of my lifetime. So in talking about the importance and the impact of finding our tribe, what I realized was that through the course of my life, I have been an individual that was very much almost fiercely independent for very much of my life. I was just very, very driven to get ahead. I was focused on how it was that I could go out there and I could make that good living, how it is that I could go out there and afford that so-called good life that we're kind of learning to go after, the American dream, as it were. And so I surrounded myself with the types of groups and the types of people that would help pull that forward for me. And so I had a lot of people that in my kind of late teens, early 20s, and early part of my career were very much focused on that. That was focused on how is it that I go out and get that good first job? How is it that I do the things necessary to build the foundation for the good life, meaning the house with the fenced in yard and the couple of dogs running and a couple of kids running around the yard and all this type of stuff. And as I started to get into that process and more specifically around my career, started to move in the direction of my career, things were going all right. Things were okay. I felt myself progressing. I was in a decent spot. I was in a very kind of secure position, which was kind of nice. And I also realized I was completely and utterly unfulfilled. I was just not enjoying really what I was doing. It felt like I was making progress. It felt like I was doing the things I was supposed to be doing. But for one reason or another, it just didn't seem like it was a fit. And so what I came to realize, and it was through a series of different experiences, was that my fierce independence was actually not simply because of that being my personality. My fierce independence was more drawn around the fact that I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. It felt like I didn't belong. It felt like I didn't really kind of have my place. I didn't really have a place that I felt safe in where I could call home, meaning that surrounding that I was really, truly looking for. And so I became independent kind of in spite of that feeling. I thought that was the path that I had to go out there and travel. And there's some reasons in my background for why that happened to be. The shortcutting the entire story is losing my home to a house fire when I was 5 years old had a bigger impact on me, my personality, my energy, my attitude towards life than I really realized for many, many years later. But when I started to recognize that what I was looking for was somewhere to begin to fit in, I was able to become more proactive in what I was looking for. Now, the first step of this was that I did still want to become successful, what my definition looked like at the time. And it meant to get out there and becoming more successful more as an entrepreneur and heading down that road because that honored both my freedom as well as my ambition and kind of drive that I had at that time. And so I started to surround myself with those types of influences that really motivated me to be more successful as an entrepreneur of how do you craft that type of a lifestyle and how do you build those types of systems in those businesses and how do you become that type of a leader or how do you become a better speaker to build that type of a business. All those types of things. And it absolutely worked. It pulled me forward yet again in my life. And I got very intentional about surrounding myself with those types of relationships and influences. And then yet again, later in that journey, I recognized that I was not yet fulfilled quite the way that I thought I was. And it's because I was after something deeper. And then another shift occurred. And the specific shift that had occurred really was around finding a group of individuals and connecting to a group of individuals that acceptance and the ability to kind of have that space to be who you are, to explore what might actually be going on for you, to be able to ask those types of questions of yourself that you don't really know where they're going to lead, but the people around you are going to support you as you go on that investigation, as opposed to saying you need an answer, you need to make progress, you need to get the next ladder, the next rung on the corporate ladder. They weren't moving me in that direction. Instead, they were allowing me to be me. And it was a group that I didn't realize I'd had around me. I never went to them for that type of support specifically until I started to realize what was going on. And that led to some very, very important shifts later on in my life. Now, the importance, the reason why I'm sharing this is that it's easy for me to look back on my life now and recognize the different types of influence and impact that so many different relationships and groups of relationships were having on me, really very much unconsciously at the time. That some instances, they did pull me forward when I needed to be. In other instances, they very much held me back, or I took on their expectations or took on their belief systems, even though they didn't really fit who I was. And looking back, I can see that now. I can see the impact of all of these types of things. But I didn't know that then. And so part of today's call, a big part of today's call, is to bring awareness, first and foremost, of the importance of these relationships, the importance of knowing that tribe and having that tribe, how to be more proactive in that type of pursuit, meaning how is it that you build that team around you that really continues to propel you forward? Or how is it that you find your tribe? How is it that you connect to a community that gives you the type of energy and emotion and support and relationship that you may be looking for? And how do we begin to build that within our lives? Meaning, how is it that we create this in a sustainable way, especially because things are going to change, meaning we're going to evolve throughout the course of our lifetime. And those relationships, those communities that we belong to, the tribes that we belong to, those are also going to evolve and shift and change with time as well. And so it was a topic that I really wanted to explore. I hear so much about people being a bit isolated out there right now, not knowing exactly where it is that they fit in, feeling like something may be off for themselves right now, but not really knowing why. This is going to be one of those calls that really helps to get you to take a look at what's going on in your surroundings and specifically within the relationships that you surround yourself with, so that you can decide what is it that may be holding you back. What is it that may be fueling you forward? What is it you want to create more of? What is it that you want less of in these types of areas? And so to do that, I have a very special guest with us today, and his name is Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar of the Happiness Studies Academy. He is the creator as well as the instructor of the Certificate in Happiness Studies program. After graduating from Harvard with a BA in philosophy and psychology and a Ph.D. in organizational behavior, Tal taught two of the most popular courses in Harvard's history, positive psychology as well as the psychology of leadership. He's an international best-selling author whose books have been translated into more than 25 languages. And in addition to establishing the Happiness Studies Academy, he is also the co-founder of Potential Life and happier.tv. Tal is a certified yoga instructor who works on bridging Eastern and Western traditions, ancient wisdom, and modern technology, science, and art. Tal, thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Luke. Thank you for having me here.
Excellent. I tell you, I always look forward to our conversations because there's part of it which I know that we intend, and there's part of it that I know we have no control over in terms of where they ultimately go.
Exactly.
So I always know that I'm going to learn something new. I guess maybe the place to start, I share a little bit of my, a little tiny glimpse of my own background of the importance of relationships on me. And I'm curious for you as well, meaning, what has been that importance of relationships, not just individually, but more that group relationship, the support teams, the social network that's around you. How has that played a role within your own life and with your own work?
Yes. So if I can start at a later point in my life, I realized, and I know today through the research of just how important relationships, a social network is for both happiness and creativity. But let me begin by just sharing an experience that I had in my early 20s that brought this idea home to me. So, I'm an introvert. I feel very comfortable on my own, reading, writing. And my fantasy for a long time was to be, not just metaphorically, but be on an island by myself and just do my thing, where, no one would bother me and I could just write and read. And that fantasy actually came true, because my first job right out of college was working in a shipping company. And I started working in the office. And after a while, the owners and myself realized that I needed to do a lot more work on the ships with the sailors, with the captain and chief engineer and the crew. So I started sailing, and I sailed on ships for on and off for over a year. And on the ship, I would teach or chat for about an hour or two a day, but for the rest of the day, I would be in my room, and my room had a small window, a sea view, and I would spend hours and hours each day there. And this was my fantasy, because I could write there, I could read, and I did all those things. So it was amazing. And then after about a month or two into it, I started to feel very lonely. And I must say, this was a novel experience for me, an emotion that I hadn't felt before, because I'd always felt like, in a sense, I had too much. I'm from a very close-knit family, and I've always had people around me, and I yearned for this being alone. And suddenly I was alone, and I realized how much I was missing the community. Not only was I feeling lonely, so it didn't just affect my emotional well-being, but I wasn't creative. And again, my fantasy fulfilled. I could write all day. No one disturbed me. Yeah. And yet I didn't feel like anything good could come out. And it was then on a visceral level that I realized just how important community was. And later on, this experience led me to do research and to explore this field. And I realized that arguably, and there's a very strong argument for that, the existence of a supportive community is the most important factor for both happiness and for creativity.
That's interesting. So I guess let's start with that, because I've started to see more and more of that research that talks about how relationships and connection are really the one thing. If you look at the Harvard Adult Development Study is one that's taken place over 75, almost 80 years now. It's the one factor that they seem to be able to isolate as contributing happiness. We're seeing it's out of Italy, I think, was another one of the studies around connection in that particular village they did the study of. So what's going on? What seems to be coming out of it that is showing how these relationships are impacting our happiness and then creativity? I don't think I've ever heard that part of it before. How does that work? Why is that happening?
Great. So let me do a very, very brief survey of the studies, continuing from where you left off. So yes, the Harvard study, 75 years following men of different socioeconomic groups, and showing that, in fact, the only predictor of happiness, and by the way, of health as well, number one predictor of health, was relationships. And it didn't matter what kind of relationships, meaning it didn't matter whether it was romantic relationships that were dominant in one's life, or family relationships, or friendships. It didn't matter that much, but relationships did matter. So that's one. Two, Ed Dinner and Marty Seligman, two of the giants of the field of positive psychology, looked for the happiest people in the world. What was unique about them? And what they found was unique about them was that they had good relationships, strong relationships. Once again, it didn't matter if it was friends or romantic partners or family, but they had a supportive social network. You go to national level happiness. The happiest countries in the world are not the ones you would expect, the wealthiest countries in the world, far from it. Yeah. Who are the happiest countries in the world? There are countries where relationships matter. Once again, whether it's family relationships or friendships, where relationships and real versus virtual relationships are a priority. So you have all this research showing time and again that it's so important for health, that it's so important for happiness. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Lord Byron, hundreds of years ago, wrote, "Friendship doubles joy and cuts grief in half." Doubles joy and cuts grief in half. So if something good happens to you and you have someone to share it with, how wonderful is that? That doubles your joy. If you're going through a difficult period, if you had a tough experience at work, at home, and you can share that experience with someone, how wonderful is that? So friendships are very important for happiness. Now, the interesting part is that they also matter for creativity, for productivity, for success as traditionally defined. There's a lovely study which was conducted, 60, maybe 70 years ago by Donald Winnicott. Donald Winnicott was a British child psychologist, and he's done some fantastic work in that area. And one of the things that he found was that when children play around their parents on the beach, they are much more creative, meaning the work that they do, building sandcastles, they're much more creative when they are within a certain radius of their parents, meaning a certain distance away from their parents, they're creative. If they get too far from their parents, they stop being creative. And he talked of the concept of a circle of creativity, a circle of creativity. Now, when you're a young child, the parent or your friend or a person you have a relationship with needs to be physically close to you, because a child is not engaged in a child is not engaged in abstract thinking. So it has to be physically close. It has to be concrete. But when you're an adult, your circle of creativity can be further away from you, but it still needs to be there. That person you feel close to needs to be there, even if it's just abstractly. And when you have that person, you're more creative. So for a child, it's building sandcastles in the sand. For an adult, it can be writing code or writing a book.
I'm curious whether or not they've linked any of that to almost a feeling of when you have that group, that circle of, like you said, the circle of creativity in this instance, how much of that has ever been linked to the idea of feeling safe or feeling secure? And so you feel like you can play more because you know that the surroundings that you are within are a more trusting, safe environment.
Yes, exactly right. So this is the idea. So research by Bowlby and Mikulincer and others on secure relationships shows exactly that you need the safety. Today we talk about psychological safety, of knowing that, someone's got your back. I'm originally from Israel, and many people ask me about Israel. They say, why is Israel the startup nation? And I actually did a lot of research on it and made a whole film about that, where I gave 6 reasons. The first reason that I highlighted, and this is the first reason that came up in my research, the most dominant one, is family support. I mean, what does it take to be creative? What does it take to innovate? It takes the courage to fail and fail again. Now, if friendship or family or relationships in general cuts grief in half, as Lord Byron argues, and he's right, then I'm much more likely to take risks and risks failing. And when I fail, I also am more likely to learn more. Dean Simonton from UC Davis has shown that the most creative people throughout history, artists, scientists, were also the people who have failed the most. So it's exactly that safety net that you have within a community, telling you it's okay to try, it's okay to fail.
So let's go off that for a moment, because this is part of the reason why I also wanted to get into this topic kind of right now, meaning in today's times. You use the phrase psychological safety. And, certainly we can talk about psychological safety, emotional safety as well, because we seem to find ourselves in very uncertain, very ambiguous, or what's the VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous is one of those phrases, right?
Correct.
And we find ourselves in that type of time. And I guess that's sort of what brings this whole topic around, is that right now, it seems like we, as much as we've gotten connected technologically, we've gotten that much more disconnected from our sense of community. And I'm curious what you've seen, because I mean, I've seen it happen from the technological standpoint. We've seen it with movements away from what have been kind of steadfast organizations inside of our communities, which also includes the drop in attendance of religious organizations and things like that. And I'm just kind of curious of what you're seeing as some of those patterns, as well as the influence that's having to our detriment right now.
Yeah. So, it's spot on, Luke. We see two processes taking place simultaneously. On the one hand, the world is becoming more uncertain, more volatile, more complex, which means by definition that people feel less secure. Right. Now, this would normally mean that we need even more support in terms of our relationships. But in fact, what is happening is a process in the opposite direction. So on the one hand, uncertainty is going up. On the other hand, social support is going down, and it's going down radically. Now, there's research by Kleinberg from NYU, a sociologist from NYU. And what Kleinberg shows is that the more time we spend online, on social media, the more lonely we actually feel. In other words, the additional time we spend on social media and not in the sandbox and not hanging out with our buddies, the lonelier we actually feel. So in our world that requires more safety net because it's so volatile and uncertain, we actually have less of it. And that is leading to some serious repercussions. Once again, on the two levels. First of all, as I mentioned, in terms of loneliness, it's going up radically, and that is closely, intimately associated with depression. So mental health levels are on the decline. The second thing, again, is creativity, and not just creativity. Again, in tomorrow's world, most of what most people are doing today, it's not going to be needed. It's not going to be necessary because robots are going to do it. Where are human beings going to be essential? They're going to be essential when it comes to creativity, thinking outside the box. These are the very human things that in order to augment, in order to support, we need a supportive network. And we're having less of it. So we have to reverse it. Initially on the individual level, we have to do it for our families and ultimately on a global level.
It's interesting because I think two points. One, which I know that we're going to get a little bit to, is I think that with that kind of increased in the volatility and uncertainty and the things that challenge our safety and the decrease of some of that social support, I think part of what we're also seeing, which again, the opportunity of this is that because some of the old structures that used to be there for that support circle around us are not holding up, meaning they're not being sought out anymore, and that support is kind of falling by the wayside. What that does mean is that we don't need to choose our parents' mode of support, as it were, meaning that we get to create something new. We get to create what today's structures look like and what today's groups and centers are going to look like. And I know we're going to get to that. So I think there's a really wonderful opportunity there where we don't have to just take what's been handed down to us in that regard. I think the interesting thing, though, that I didn't want to move away from yet was that social media, I think, is such a wonderful analogy of things that are going on right now, and a real life example of things that are going on right now, because when we're on social media or anything along those lines that has us consistently comparing ourselves to what's there, we may view it in terms of, I'm just trying to keep updated and see what's going on. Our minds can't help but saying, how does that compare? How am I going to judge myself against what I'm seeing, which reinforces this idea that we are isolated. We're different then. It creates more separation. And I think the other thing, which I don't think I've heard this often in conversation around this, is that there literally is a biological benefit when we are person to person. It's what is it? Dopamine's referred to as the hug hormone or something like that. There's oxytocin. We get an effect. Yes. Oxytocin. That's right. Oxytocin. And we get a physiological, biological benefit from being in literal physical connection with people. You can't imitate that through wires. It's impossible. Yeah. And so there's so much that we're missing when we don't find these ways of gathering we're gathering society still. There's still a part of us that wants that and clings for that. So it is really turning things up and starting to look at how we can turn things into our head. The pendulum is kind of swung a little bit too far.
Yeah, so the first thing, it's important to realize that social media can be wonderful. I mean, first of all, the fact that we're chatting now and we've gathered a community of people to watch this. What a privilege. Just recently, Sean, who was my best friend until the age of 12, and then both of us went into different continents, and we haven't been in touch for 35 years. We met thanks to social media. My wife met her amazing, my sister met her amazing husband on social media. So it's a wonderful thing. It can bring people together. The thing is that we need to start looking at it as a means rather than an end, as a means of bringing people together. And the second thing we need to look at is in moderation. And that's key. Yeah. Being online for 30 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes a day, that's okay. But when people spend hours and hours, day after night after day, that's a problem. A good friend of mine is just building a very large addiction center now. And he recently shared with me the latest research on addiction. The number one addiction today is no longer gambling or alcohol or drugs. It's screen. Number one addiction. And that unfortunately takes away from the real time that we so need. As you pointed out, it's a biological need. We need touch. We need face-to-face interaction. We need to feel the heart beating. And there's some actually data to suggest that we emit energy. And again, this energy is not, it's emitted, but it's not absorbed when, we're on a screen. We need to be face to face, heart to heart.
I just wanted to pause for a moment and do two things. First, I wanted to say thank you. So many of you have been sharing and starting your own conversations, adding reviews and ratings, and just been really a great group of listeners engaging in these conversations and moving them forward. Thank you, because that's why we do this. Secondly, for those of you that are not already getting in on the action, or for those that have started to engage, but you haven't yet experienced that full access, I did want to invite you to join that. If you go over to oneideaaway.com/join, that's going to give you first access to our weekly conversations, as well as the exercises, reflections, even the online challenges that we're now rolling out. We had a member just the other day write in and tell us how a recent exercise we released helped her identify several new possibilities she didn't realize were right in front of her. It dropped her anxiety, dropped her concerns and her doubts, and she was able to create a brand new option from the ideas that were sparked. She's now completely comfortable and confident to move forward on what had been a really tough situation. That exercise, it came from inside access of the One Idea Away community, the newsletter, the private group, the ongoing interactions and practices and conversations that we share. So I hope that you're going to join in on the fun and use it to connect to the peace and the joy and the confidence and support that'll help you create and experience the life you desire. Again, just go over to oneideaaway.com/join. And I really look forward to connecting with you inside the community.
I actually wanted to just take kind of a moment here in the middle, because I want to start us to obviously switch gears in terms of we've labeled out what some of the challenges are. We've talked about why there is a tremendous amount of need and importance for this. And I do want to start to switch gears to, well, what do those healthy relationships look like? What does that healthy community look like? And how do we build it and sustain it? Before we do that, and Tal, I'm curious if you want to add any further thoughts to this, but start to take a look at, I kind of wrote a little mini assessment for us to take a look at while we're here on the live cast, and for everybody that's listening to kind of run through, is start just by assessing kind of where you are, just the real general sense of, what is that overall happiness that you have for life? Meaning not what your mood is, not just what you're feeling at this moment, but your overall happiness of, generally speaking, how happy do you believe yourself to be? if you look at, proverbial one that's out there, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being your kind of best possible life, where are you on that scale of 1 to 10 right now? Where do you see that? And now begin to take a look at maybe specific areas of your life, meaning your health, your career, your finances, those types of things, and look at some of the different aspects and how does that happiness and satisfaction go up and down. Now, take a look at your social influences, meaning take a look at the people that you surround yourself with most often. They could be the personal relationships, but they could be professional relationships, social relationships. They could be any number of things. And think about the influence that that group has on you intentionally and unintentionally. How often do they complain? How often are they grateful? How often do they eat what would make us healthier? And how often do they like the fried food? How often do they talk about how motivated and driven they are by work? And how often do they talk about how stressed they are and how little time they have? And think about the influence that the people you surround yourself with have on you. Tal, I'm just curious if there's any other types of questions that you may throw out there for people to help them assess where the social influence may be occurring in their life.
So think also about, and again, I'm talking now from personal experiences and also from the research out there. Think about your health behaviors. Think about your moral standards. Think about your levels of happiness. Because a lot of time, again, this is based on research by Christakis, who's from Yale, and Fowler, who show how important our social network is to how we live our life and to how we experience our lives.
Talk about that last word, experience, that phrase of experience our lives. Share a little bit more on that, because that's a big one.
Yeah, it is a big one. And the reason is because, you can find two people who have identical, or let's say theoretically, we could find two people who have identical life circumstances. One person never ceases to complain. The other person is appreciative and rejoices, even though they have the same experience. Or you look at a more specific example. You have two people who run a race. Both of them think they can win it, but they end up coming in 5th position. One person will interpret the event as a catastrophe, as terrible. The other would say, oh, wow, it's interesting. What can I learn? How can I improve? So the objective circumstances, of course, matter. But what matters even more so are the subjective evaluations of those circumstances. And these subjective interpretations of our circumstances are very much contingent on the social environment we're in. If we're in an environment where people usually complain and take for granted what they have, we're more likely to follow suit. On the other hand, if we're in an environment where people are appreciative, grateful, humble, generous, you name it, we're more likely to follow suit. Now, that doesn't mean there is no individual agency. Of course, we can decide to be the kind of person we want to be regardless of the social environment we're in which case we're also likely to change our social environment. At the same time, the social environment still has an impact on it.
Yeah. A couple of things on that. One, kind of working in reverse order of what you just brought up. I mean, in terms of that social environment, one thing, that I want to make very clear for everybody, depending on how you came down on some of that self-reflection, self-assessment there, we're not telling you to run out and get rid of the brother who's always complaining, or the spouse, don't do that. Or if you are that spouse, I'm not saying to change anything along those lines right now. It's really just about being really conscious about the types of relationships that you do create and can co-create within your life, and how you can create that social environment that supports you and fuels you more often than anything that may take you out of the type of space that you want to be. Okay. The other thing, and this is just kind of a fun thing to think about in terms of that social influence. I don't know for all of you, but for me, if I'm in an area, geographic area, that has a really strong accent, I'm prone to wanting to talk in that accent. I don't know why. It just kind of comes out. It creeps up. It sneaks up on me. And what I could say is that part of that is also from the background of how we function. We have things like mirror neurons and things that are going on in the background where we do want to assimilate to our environment. We want to assimilate to the signs that we're getting. Very often when there's a panic that's going on, for instance, one of the very first things that you actually see as a reaction from people is they don't react to the panic. They take a look to see how other people are reacting to the panic that's going on, and then they change and they react in that type of manner. And so we take these social cues, we take these influence cues very, very seriously in the way that we operate. We've done that for survival purposes. We've done that for things that were really, really necessary 10,000, 15, 20,000 years ago. We have forgotten to upgrade some of the software. And so we're talking about being very intentional and conscious of what some of that software that may need some updating. And it's going to mean we need to be more proactive. We need to be more deliberate and intentional and mindful about how we go about that. And so with that in mind, I want to talk about these communities and these relational groups, these social networks that thrive. And Tal, you may be able to add a lot more to this than what I've got, but I had seen a summary of research the other day, and I read a little bit further into it. It was in the study of blue zones. And one of the specific studies or areas that they had studied is that the oldest kind of group of women in the world on average is in Okinawa, Japan. And that the average woman lives to be 90 years old in Okinawa. And one of the things that's extraordinary is that as babies, their families place them, and I wrote it down because I don't want to I've got to pronounce it wrong anyway. I think it's called a moai, meaning they place them into these groups of 5 individuals, and they become this social network, this social influence, this mastermind, as I would term it for my own life. They become this alliance through their entire life. And that's one of the absolute key factors that they find in blue zones are these very strong, happy, positive social connections. Tal, I'm sure you could probably add a lot more to what the data and the research says there. But I'm curious, as we switch into talking about what these communities can look like, just how much you're seeing in that type of data and that type of study of how important those core cluster of positive relationships are on our health, our well-being, our success, everything about life.
Yes. So, so what you do see is that when you have those very close-knit relationships, once again, you see the impact on longevity, i.e. physical health. So you see it in all the blue zones. You see it in Okinawa. You see it on Sardinia, in Italy. You see it in Costa Rica. You see it in Linda Loma, which is just outside LA. You see it on a Greek island. So in all these blue zones, and they identified about 5 areas, so Okinawa and 4 others, you see very close-knit social relationships, whether it's family or whether it's the larger community. There's a real emphasis on that. So in terms of health, longevity, they live longer. These blue zones have not only a higher average age, also there are more centenarians by far than any other place in the world. So that's one thing. The second thing that you see is that very often the most successful people have their small, close-knit group, social support, social network. So one example that always comes to mind when I talk about this is one of my mentors, who's today a professor at the Harvard Business School, Bill George. I remember him talking about the fact that he and his close-knit group of friends, and Bill George ran Medtronics, a very successful pharmaceutical high-tech company. He took it from 1 billion to 60 billion, became one of the most celebrated CEOs of the 20th century. So he credits much of his success as well as happiness to the fact that every Wednesday morning he meets with a small group of friends that had been together since school. They meet every morning and they talk about work, and they talk about hardships at home and losses and illness and joy and celebration and children and grandchildren. They've been meeting for decades every Wednesday morning. And he attributes much of his success to that because he has a real supportive board. Now he has this board, going back to the first idea that I talked about, he has a circle of creativity where he feels safe because he can talk about anything there. So when it comes to success, we see many more leaders, and you're thinking about coaches. Who's going to coach the coach? You need that supportive group as a coach, as a therapist, as a manager, as a parent, to help you, to support you, to give you advice, to be there as a sounding board. And so we have health, we have success, and also, as I alluded to, and you alluded to, happiness. Again, it doubles joy, it cuts grief in half. If you have this small group of people whom you can trust, and it's not just, you don't just see one part. When you go on Facebook or social media, you see half the person or half the life. You see them just smiling and happy on vacation, doing great. But if you have a group where you can be real, where you can be genuine, what a difference that can make to your overall experience of life. You're not alone. You're not alone.
It's interesting because in the way that you describe that, one of the things that became very important to me is, as part of that transition that I was making, my own life, my own career, was in a very intimate mastermind group, which was a group of 5 individuals. And while there were some intentions and some objectives behind it, it became more of sort of what you just described, which was that we knew that it was a group that we could keep updated in our lives. We knew we felt the support of them there. It created that field of both safety as well as acceptance that you're surrounded by. It gives you the space to be able to play, to try on new ideas, to try on new things before anybody says, well, you got to commit to something and move on. You find yourself in a very, very different space when you are surrounded by that type of a social influence. And I guess it's one of the questions that I get asked, but I want to pose this to you first, Tal, is when you think about the foundations of putting those relationships, those key social relationships, whether it's a few key one-to-one or it is to a group, what do you see as some of the foundations for creating those types of relationships that can support you in that manner?
Yeah, good. So, sometimes these relationships are launched organically. They just happen. You meet a friend at business school, you meet a friend in high school, and you just remain friends and you continue seeing each other, and you live happily ever after, so to speak. But very often, and especially today, we can't rely on organic development of these relationships. Why? Because we're no longer living in the same village. Yeah. 100 years ago, you were born in a town, and you probably were buried in that town. So people remained in the same environment, and it was natural. You lived in one place, your parents lived there, and your grandparents, and later on your grandchildren lived in the same house. So there was a natural tribe. Today, we are veering away from nature. And we're no longer living in tribes. And you may grow up in Boston, but then you move to LA or to Frankfurt or to Shanghai. How do you maintain a tribe when you're no longer in the same physical location, given that we know that a virtual tribe is not enough? Yeah. It's good, part of it in moderation, but it's not enough. And this is where you need to put in some interventions. Now, what are these interventions? Wherever you are, whether you are in Shanghai, Frankfurt, or Boston, create a real group of like-minded, like-hearted people. So if you're a coach, look for other coaches in that area. It's easier, by the way, if you have if you're in a workplace, because then naturally that can come out. But make a point of seeing people, of spending time with people after work, during work, on the weekends. Join a social club. This is a data point which I love. So one of the happiest countries in the world is Denmark. Do you know that in Denmark, 93% of the population are members of social clubs, active members of social clubs? It could be a sailing club. It could be a church. It could be a chess club. It doesn't matter. But they're active members. They actually go to meetings. They hang out. They play together. They laugh together. I'm sure they also cry together. So this is key, again, to happiness, to creativity, innovation, as well as to health. So go out of your way. And you need to go out of your way. Again, it won't happen by itself as it did only 100 years ago. Go out of your way and create those real, rather than virtual, social networks, like-minded, like-hearted people.
I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that 93% of the population is actively involved in social groups in the country. But it does, and I keep hearing about it. Even some of the research we were sharing with Blue Zones and these Moai groups of the encouragement of how you can get into a walking club, a hiking club, a cycling club, a yoga group, whatever, right? There's so many different things that are out there now. Now, the beauty of the online world is we can find those things. We can help organize, we can pull those people together, we can find like-minded, but then it's still up to us. There's no match.com for friends, right? So we're going to, right, Matt? Yep.
Yeah, no. So I absolutely, there is no match.com for friends. And even if there is, as I mentioned earlier, the screen is addictive. So we find it on screen and then we say, okay, well, we'll stay a bit more. And then we stay on and we don't go to that meeting because, we're tired and we had a long day. No, make that effort. There is arguably nothing more important than that physical, real connection.
It absolutely is, and that's where you start to create that different experience of life. When you've got one of the devices that is up, this isn't an experience. It's just a screen, as exactly as you're saying. And so you've got the physiological, biological, emotional benefit of being there in person. But part of what that does to your own mental state, intellectual state, spiritual state, is it allows you to experience. And it allows you to experience life. Yeah. That's the stuff that fills us up. That's the stuff that fills in all the different parts of kind of who we are. And that's what we also look back on. You think about it. You don't remember just little tiny results or little data points in your life. You remember experiences. Those are the things that stand out the most. And it's not when you were in front of a screen reading something or watching or scrolling through a feed. It's something much different than that. And so I guess maybe, Tal, what are some of the organizations that you're aware of? Because I'm familiar with a few that are out there that are totally different types of communities, right? There's the World Cafe model, right? And these are individuals that want to get together around really thought-provoking questions that might be able to provoke some social change or community change or really move forward a particular issue. Really, really unique model that was almost born, it literally actually was almost born out of a happy accident. The initial meeting had a raining event, and they had to separate into small groups that actually became the model for what World Cafe is today. But that's one type of group. Then there's the social groups, the meetup type groups that we've talked about. I'm just curious from what you've seen, what are maybe one or two other different types of social groups that are out there that we may want to take a look at so we can understand what we might be looking for?
Yeah. So, there's, I think about my parents, one of my fondest childhood memories was that my parents would get together with their friends and just hang out, and they would talk and they would laugh. And, sometimes I would understand what they were talking about. Other times I didn't, but I got the vibe. I got the fact that they were they're having a wonderful time. And I was just talking to my mom about this, and she said, we have a group that, and I mean, I know that group, I know the people, they've been meeting for the last 50 years, once a month, and it's always in someone else's home, and that person is responsible for bringing a speaker. And the speaker can be their friend, a child, a professional speaker, but it's very, it doesn't have to be someone grandiose, but to talk about a topic, and the speaker presents for an hour, and then they spend a few more hours together, just chatting and eating. So this is the informal group that they started 50 years ago, and they've been attending it religiously for the last 50 years. Over time they also became much closer, and they go on trips together. So it evolves. So I would very much encourage you to look at the informal groups out there that just meet around a topic or a lecture or a discussion or a book clubs. I mean, where have book clubs gone? They're wonderful. First of all, it forces you, in a sense, to read a book a month or every 2 months. And second, you get to discuss it with people. And again, you hang out together, you eat together, you have fun together. That's real relationships. So these would be two ideas. The third, and again, this is for a very particular group, but it's the YPO and WPO organizations, young president organizations, where leaders of organizations get together and they talk about business. They give one another advice on business. But from the YPOs that I've been involved with, and I've been involved with many of them, the most important part there is the social part. The fact that they get to really talk and share with friends. So there are the formal ones. And as you said, Luke, you can find groups online easily and readily. At the same time, it's also very easy to create those informal meetings by yourself around a book, a lecture, an idea, food, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that you shared from that perspective, because there's so many ways to get started and to begin with things like this. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than the informal path of choose a book that you love, choose a recipe that you love, an activity that you love, just something along those lines, and put the feeler out to people or even through the town paper or through the community center or anything that's informal.
Or Facebook.
Or through Facebook. That's where you want to use social media. Use the patch.com. Use the places that people do find out about these things if you want to expand it beyond just the initial group of people that you may invite. And at the same time, you can look in those similar spots to find somebody who may have already started a group like that too, and see that you may want to join. If you're not sure and you want to just put your toe in the water, you can do that as well. It doesn't have to be anything more formal or more complicated in any manner than that. Because I know that we've only got a few minutes left. Tal, I want to share a little bit of what we're up to with One Idea Away, but first I wanted to talk to you about what you're doing with Happier Center specifically. So as background, let me tee a little of this up, is that in Tal's bio, I mentioned he's a founder creator of the Happiness Studies Academy, as well as the Happiness Studies program. And it's a culmination of so much extraordinary work that Tal has done throughout his life. And he could have stopped at that, meaning he could have stopped at, here's what I know, here's what I want you to know, here's what I want you to employ in your life or professionally or otherwise. And he could have stopped there, but you, Tal, did not. You're choosing to do something in addition to that. And I'm curious if you can not only explain a little bit more about what you're doing with the Happier Centers, but why. What's the real motivation behind it?
Yeah, so, I would really like to see a world that capitalizes on the progress that we've made on modernity, and yet doesn't lose the secret sauce of the past. And again, that not so secret sauce of the past is the close, intimate relationships. And towards that end, I'm encouraging graduates from the Happiness Studies Academy programs to create happier centers. The happier centers are places that disseminate happiness, and they disseminate happiness through lectures and workshops and various programs and just get-togethers. And these are physical spaces where a physical space can be your common room at home, or a classroom in a school that you would use after hours, or a large retreat center. And these places would bring together people who are interested in exploring happiness. Again, without pressure to be happy all the time. That's not possible, of course. But places where they can learn about happiness, where can they watch a movie together and then discuss it, where they can watch a lecture and then discuss it, where they can go through a group meditation together, or meet there and go for a run as a group. But these are places that would bring together people for face-to-face live interactions, and use technology as well. Because, we can sit in a room and with very inexpensive technology, listen to the most beautiful music in the world. What a luxury is that? We can listen to a concert, we can listen to a singer, whatever. We can watch the best actors in the world, the best movies that have been created for the past 100 years, enjoy them, and then have a conversation around them. And this way you benefit from modernity, and at the same time you don't lose that important ingredient of a happy life, because you get together. And again, it could be in your common room at home, or in a place that you rent, or in a full-fledged retreat center.
Tal, thank you for that. I think it's so much of what we've been chatting about is to give everybody the opportunity and some of the support, the resources to get offline and to get back online in terms of in person and being really face to face with each other. We can use technology to support that process, to enable that process in so many beautiful ways, as you described.
Exactly.
But it's about, being there together. The team actually just popped up. If you're looking for more information about what Tal's up to with the Happiness Studies Academy, as well as the Happier Centers, just go ahead to the link that was posted there inside the chat right now. This is very similar, and it's one of the reasons why Tal and the Happiness Studies Academy has been so aligned and partnered with what we do at One Idea Away, as well as our kind of our parent, which is IPEC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, is that we have a similar vision. We want to be able to get people together to go on that self-exploration, that journey of really discovering exactly who they are and how they want to create and align a life that is designed based on uniquely their experience of life and what they choose to experience and the types of careers and relationships in life that they really truly wish to lead. And so while One Idea Away has done so more through the bringing of some of the content and the platform and some of the broadcasting that we do, it is also with the idea that either through some of the events that our team is going to be hosting or in partnership with the Happier Centers is to give people a place to start getting back in community with each other. It is truly, it's been one of the blessings of my life is to be able to get into that type of connection with people. And I didn't know it. I had no idea the importance that held to me. As I said, I was independent. I thought I knew why I was independent, and I really discovered what was underneath it. And it was when I got into connection with others in a much deeper capacity that so much of the experience of life was enriched in ways that I never could have anticipated. So you can check out, again, the links of what Tal is up to with HSA. You can check out what we're up to with IPEC Coaching, specifically our Coach Training Institute, the kind of the parent of what we do here at One Idea Away. If you're here, you probably already know about One Idea Away, but certainly go to oneideaaway.com/join, and you can stay up to date with all the things we've got going on. We've got another very fun live cast coming up next month, the middle of next month, September 18th, if I recall. And that one is going to focus actually on purpose and how so much of what we know about purpose is completely and utterly misleading and frustrating, and where we want to refocus of what purpose really truly is, what we're really after. And we're going to be diving into that as well. But for today, Tal, I just wanted to thank you so much for being here and just see if you had any last words of connection, of relationship for everybody to ponder today.
Yeah. So look, first of all, thank you very much for including me in your community. Since we met and you brought me into the IPEC family, it's been really a fun, wonderful, and meaningful experience. So thank you for that. And I would like to just end with a simple thought of a commitment. Commit to spending 15 minutes, that's not a lot, extra every day in face-to-face interactions. That's all, 15 minutes. And you'll see that those 15 minutes may go into 30 minutes and 3 hours, and that's okay. But reconnect to this very basic need that we all have, the number one source of happiness, creativity, innovation, as well as health.
Tal, I absolutely love that. And I guess the one piece that I will then just add on to that perspective is use that 15 minutes. And one of the gifts that I think is one of the greatest gifts that you can give somebody in this world is the gift of your presence. So in those 15 minutes, to be really, truly mindfully present with the person or persons that you happen to be with, because at those moments, You can let them know that they're seen. You can be seen. You can let them know that they matter and are valued just as you matter and you are valued. So much of Tal said it before, and it's so much of what's kind of behind what we do as well. You're not alone in this. We're in this together. And we think that it can be a much happier, more meaningful, more spiritually filled and consciousness filled world when we do it and travel it together. And to me, that's an experience that I want more and more people to be connected to. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us on the live cast here in August on the One Idea Away community. Once again, a big thank you to Tal Ben-Shahar. Tal, thank you so much for being here. And everyone, I'll see you again next month.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you really enjoyed it, do me a favor, let us know. You can keep the conversation going and send us a message on our Facebook page, which is simply One Idea Away. Go ahead and tag me in the post or even just direct messages. Also, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this episode along with someone that you believe could benefit from hearing the ideas and the messages that we got into. That's pretty much why we do this. So you can just go ahead and share it from your app or email it along, whatever works for you. The point is to share, to talk, to discuss, and keep the dialogue going, because it's in those conversations that ideas can take hold and create profound shifts in perspective. That's what allows us to live life more fully, deeply, and consciously. As always, we would love to see you post a review for the podcast in iTunes or whichever app you're using. And until next time, remember, you're never more than one idea away from a whole new reality. This is Luke Iorio and One Idea Away, signing off.